My girlfriend left me saying, "He makes me happy." Then her boyfriend beat her while she screamed my name. I have been sitting in this hospital waiting room for 6 hours and I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. My girlfriend thinks I should try to sleep. She said this. Priya, my current girlfriend, the woman I have been with for 3 months, who found out about all of this when I called her from the hospital parking lot at midnight. She said it gently, in the voice she uses when she knows I won't listen but wants the record to show she tried. She offered to come. I told her to stay home. She said okay, and then she said try to sleep, and I said I will, and we both knew I wouldn't, and that was an hour ago, and I'm still in this chair with the cold coffee she can't bring me and the vending machine down the hall that makes a sound every 11 minutes that I have started to take personally. I don't have a tidy way to start this. I've been awake for 23 hours. There is dried blood on the sleeve of my jacket that I keep looking at and then deliberately looking away from, and then finding my eyes drifting back to. The plastic chair I'm sitting in was clearly designed by someone who has never needed to sit in one for longer than the time it takes to be called in for an appointment. I have nobody left to call. Everyone who needs to know already knows. So I'm doing this, writing it down, putting it somewhere outside myself because it has to go somewhere and I've run out of other options. Her name is Maya. She was mine for 2 years. She has been someone else's for 8 months. And approximately 10 hours ago, she was screaming my name from the floor of an apartment I've never been inside, while a man I'd never met broke 2 of her ribs and fractured her cheekbone. I'm going to tell you all of it. The whole thing, from the beginning, as accurately as I can manage at 4:30 in the morning when my hands are still not entirely steady. Not the version I've been narrating in my head where I'm a wronged hero or a tragic fool. Just what happened, in the order it happened, as close to the truth as I can get. I met Maya when we were both 23, at a reading event at a bookshop that a mutual friend had dragged us both to independently and then failed to show up for himself, leaving us to discover each other in the small talk shuffle of people who don't know why they're standing in the same room. She was reading the program with the focused stillness of someone who had fully committed to not needing to make conversation. I asked her if she knew anything about the author being featured. She looked up with the expression of someone weighing whether to be annoyed, decided against it, and said, "I know enough to have shown up, which might have been a mistake." We talked through the whole event and then through 2 hours at a bar across the street afterward. We exchanged numbers in the rain outside and she ran for her bus and looked back once, briefly, before she turned the corner, and that look, quick and unguarded like she hadn't planned to do it, is something I've carried with me ever since and probably always will. We were together for 2 years. I could spend this entire night on those 2 years and I'm not going to, because that's not what this story needs right now. But I want you to understand that they were real. We were good together. Not flawless. We argued about money and about how much time I spent with friends she didn't particularly like and about a trip to Portugal she wanted to take that I kept postponing, and we never took, and I think about that now sometimes in the category of small avoidable failures that accumulate in the margins of a relationship. But underneath the ordinary friction was something solid. I knew her. I thought I knew her completely, which is the part of the sentence I've been quietly revising ever since. She loved quietly and fiercely, the way people love who learned early that it could be withdrawn without warning. She had a laugh that came in stages. First a small, almost surprised sound, then the full thing breaking open like something that had been held. She slept on the left side of the bed and stole the duvet every single night and denied it every single morning with a conviction that never wavered. She kept a running list in her phone of words she thought were beautiful purely for the sound of them, not the meaning, and she added to it regularly and never showed anyone. I only knew about it because I borrowed her phone once to look something up and saw the note titled Just Sounds and asked her about it, and she went pink and grabbed the phone back and changed the subject, and I loved her so completely in that moment that it was almost frightening. 8 months ago, she sat me down and told me she was leaving. How she left. She didn't leave for another person. Not officially, not in that conversation, not in the words she'd clearly practiced and was delivering from somewhere careful and pained inside herself. She left because she said she'd been slowly disappearing inside us, that our relationship had a shape she'd built herself into rather than grown into, and that she needed to find out who she was in the space of her own life, without me as the reference point. I heard it. I believed it because I could see the truth in parts of it even through the devastation of hearing it. I had been, in ways I was only beginning to understand, someone who filled all the available space. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but thoroughly. And Maya was someone who had never quite learned to say you're taking up too much room until the moment she said it by leaving. I was gutted. I was gutted in the specific airless way of a loss you saw coming and couldn't prevent, which is in some ways worse than being blindsided, because there's no shock to hide in. 6 weeks after she left, a mutual friend named Kieran told me, with the expression of a man delivering news he'd been explicitly asked not to deliver but couldn't hold anymore, that there was someone named Dominic. She'd met him at work. He was 31, confident, Kieran said carefully, and charming, and serious about her in a way that had apparently been visible to everyone around her before it was visible to her. They'd been talking, just talking, she'd maintained to Kieran, for a couple of months before she ended things with me. The technical sequence was, she left me, then she was with him. The less technical reality was a little murkier, but I didn't dig into it because digging would have required asking questions whose answers I wasn't ready for. I called her. She was honest. She'd always been honest, which was one of the things I loved about her and one of the things that made the honesty, in this case, particularly hard to receive. She said she hadn't planned it. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped I'd understand eventually, when the rawness had settled. And then she said the thing that I have turned over more times than I can count in the 8 months since. He makes me happy, Daniel. In a way I didn't know I needed. I said okay. I said I hoped it was real. I meant neither of those things at the time. I have very slowly, over many months, come to mean both of them. Or I had until approximately 16 hours ago. We agreed to no contact. Not in anger, mutually, deliberately, because we were both people who understood that half measures in the immediate aftermath of something like this tend to extend the worst of it rather than ease it. I kept her number in my phone. I kept her in my contacts. I just stopped. We both stopped. The 8 months. I'm not going to pretend this went cleanly, because it didn't. Grief doesn't travel in a straight line, and the grief of a relationship ending has the particular quality of incompleteness. The person is still alive, still somewhere, still presumably laughing in stages at things that aren't your jokes. The absence isn't clean. It's porous. I heard things. Kieran was loyal and careful, but occasionally, in the unself-conscious way of someone relaxed by a few drinks, a detail would surface. She seemed well. The relationship seemed serious. Dominic had met her family, which was a threshold I had never crossed in 2 years, and when that particular piece of information landed, it stayed lodged somewhere I couldn't reach. I ran. I got better at cooking, specifically the 2 or 3 things Maya had always said she wished I'd learned to make, which is either a form of growth or a form of delayed tribute, possibly both. I read more. I took a long weekend trip to a city I'd never been to, alone, and was surprised to find I didn't mind the alone. I went on a date in month 4 that confirmed I wasn't ready, and a date in month 6 that suggested I was approaching something like readiness, and then I met Priya in month 7 at a work thing, and she was funny and direct and entirely herself, and I liked her in the uncomplicated way of someone who has been through a complicated thing and is grateful for something that isn't. Priya knows about Maya in the general sense. She knows she exists, that the relationship was significant, that it ended. She doesn't know everything. She was going to know everything eventually, in the way that people in honest relationships eventually do, but I'd been taking my time getting there. Now she knows because I called her from a hospital parking lot at midnight and started with the words, "I need to tell you some things," and told her all of it. Fast, standing in the cold with my jacket still on from when I'd grabbed it off the chair and my hands not entirely steady. She was quiet through most of it. At the end she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Not really." And she said, "Okay, I'm here." She offered to come. I told her to stay home. I don't know fully why I said that. Maybe because the hospital felt like a space that belonged to something older than us. Maybe because I wasn't ready for those 2 worlds to be in the same room. Maybe I just needed to sit with it alone for a while before I let anyone new into it. The call. I was asleep. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, which I know because I looked at the time before I looked at the name, and the name was Maya, and the 2 facts met somewhere in my half-awake brain with a collision that had me sitting upright before I'd made any conscious decision to do so. I answered. It was not what I expected. I don't know exactly what I'd imagined, in the distant, rarely visited place where I'd ever imagined this call. Her crying, probably needing to talk, some version of the late night reaching out I had half feared and half hoped for in the first months and then gradually stopped thinking about. What I heard was not that. There was sound. Not voices, not words, not anything immediately legible. And underneath it, her voice, high and wrong and pressured in a way I had never heard from her in 2 years of knowing her, saying my name. Not hello, not Daniel, it's me. Just my name, the way you say the name of whoever you reach for when everything else has gone. I said her name back, twice. I said, Maya, what's happening, talk to me. And I was already standing, already moving toward the door, without having made any decision to move. There was a sound I didn't understand, and then the line cut. I called back. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called Kieran. He answered on the third ring, groggy and confused, and I told him what I'd heard and what I needed, which was the address. Dominic's apartment, the place Maya had moved into 4 months ago, the address I had never asked for and Kieran had never offered. He gave it to me without asking why. I was in my car before we finished the call. I drove in a way I'm not going to describe in detail for legal reasons, but I will say that the GPS said 14 minutes and I was there in 11. The apartment building. I'm going to be careful about this part. Not to protect anyone who doesn't deserve protection, but because some of what happened in that apartment is Maya's story more than mine, and I don't think it's mine to tell in full. She will tell it when she's ready, to whoever she's ready to tell it to, in the words she chooses. What I will tell you is what I encountered in the hallway. Neighbors outside a door. A woman in her 60s with a phone in her hand who had already called the police. A younger man who had tried the door and found it locked and looked at me with the expression of someone very relieved to see someone else arrive. The sound from inside the apartment was something I don't have language for, and don't want language for, and hope I forget eventually even though I don't expect to. I am 25 years old, and I am not a large man, and I have not been in a physical fight since a shove in a school corridor when I was 14. What happened next was not brave in any composed or deliberate sense. It was just the only available option. I put my shoulder into the door once. The frame cracked. I put my shoulder into it again, harder, and it gave. What followed lasted less than a minute. I want to be precise about that because in my memory it has the stretched, overexposed quality of something much longer, but it was less than a minute. It ended with me on the floor next to Maya, one hand on her shoulder, repeating that she was okay in the voice you use when you are trying to make something true by saying it, and Dominic elsewhere in the room, no longer a concern. The police arrived. The paramedics arrived. I answered every question I was asked, and I will answer every question that is still coming. She said my name again in the ambulance. Quiet this time. The medic glanced at me, and I looked at her, and I didn't say anything because there was nothing that would have been adequate. The waiting room. Here is something about hospital waiting rooms at 4 in the morning. They are one of the most honest environments I have ever been in. There's nothing to perform. The fluorescent lighting removes all social scaffolding. Everyone sitting in a chair in a place like this is sitting in it because something happened that they didn't choose, and the waiting is the only available action, and everyone present understands that without having to explain it. I've been here for 6 hours. Kieran arrived about 90 minutes after I did, sat with me, talked for a while, and is now asleep in the chair across from me with his head at an angle that is going to cause him problems in the morning. Maya's older sister Ren arrived at 2-something, having driven from nearly 3 hours away. She walked in, saw me, and crossed the room and put her arms around me without saying a word, and held on for a long time, and it was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in longer than I can immediately remember. She's in with Maya now. They let her in about an hour ago. The nurse said Maya is stable. The ribs will heal. The cheekbone will heal. She's sedated, mostly, for the pain, and she has a long road ahead of her that I am not going to pretend I fully understand the shape of yet. I've been sitting here thinking. I've been trying to think in an organized way and mostly failing. What comes instead is a kind of non-linear accumulation, memories and questions and feelings that don't line up into any coherent argument, just exist all at once, the way they do when something large has happened and your mind hasn't caught up to it yet. I keep thinking about the word she used when she left me. Happy. He makes me happy. I have spent 8 months trying to be genuinely glad that she found something that made her happy, and mostly I managed it in the way you manage things by deciding to and then doing the work every time the decision needs to be made again. I managed it. I was getting there. And now I'm here and I don't know what she found, or how long it was good before it wasn't, or whether she knew things she didn't tell anyone, or whether it came from nowhere. I don't know, and it's not my story to demand, and I'm not going to demand it. But it sits in me nonetheless. The not knowing sits in me like weather. The thing I haven't said out loud. There's something I haven't said to anyone in this waiting room because it would sound wrong without the full context. And I'm not sure I fully understand it myself. And I'm aware it's the kind of admission that could be misread easily. When I was driving to that building at midnight, running lights, calling and calling a phone that kept going to voicemail, something moved through me that wasn't only fear. Underneath the fear, underneath the adrenaline, underneath everything necessary and immediate, there was something that I have been sitting with for hours now, trying to name accurately. I felt needed. Not in a glad about this way. Not in any way that involves satisfaction or relief or anything that would stand up as a feeling I'd choose. Just in the bare, foundational way of realizing that in the worst moment of her life, with every name she had available to her, she called mine. That I am still, somewhere in the architecture of her, the person she reaches for. I don't know what to do with that. I'm genuinely not sure I'm supposed to do anything with it. It's not a claim. It's not a re-entry point. It's not a sign I'm going to interpret in some convenient direction. It's just a fact about the night and a fact about the two of us, and I'm sitting with it the way you sit with facts that don't have obvious implications yet, carefully without forcing a conclusion. I loved her when she was mine. I loved her when she left. I love her now down a hallway, in a room I'm not in, being watched over by her sister. That has not changed tonight. It may not change. I'm at peace with the fact that love is not always a plan or a question or a door. Sometimes it's just a true thing that exists and you acknowledge it and you keep going. I have a girlfriend. Priya is kind and funny and real, and I am not going to do anything to damage what we're building, including lying to myself about what tonight has clarified. That's a conversation I owe her. That's the next thing after whatever this thing is. But right now, the most honest thing I can tell you at 4:30 in the morning in this chair is simply this. I got in the car. I went through the door. She's alive and healing. And I would do every single part of it again, the same way, without a second's hesitation. That's not a complicated feeling. It's actually the simplest feeling I've had all night. Maya's sister came out of the room 20 minutes ago. She came and sat down next to me. Not across from me, next to me. And she handed me a coffee she'd found from somewhere I hadn't discovered yet in this building. And she sat with me for a moment in quiet. Then she said, "She's asking for you." I said, "How is she?" Rin considered the question in the way of someone who has spent her whole life being precise about things that matter. She said, "She's Maya. She's already annoyed about having to be here. She said the pillow smells wrong." I said, "That sounds right." Rin said, "She's going to need time. A lot of it. And not just for the physical things." I said I knew. She looked at me then, directly, with an expression I couldn't fully read. And she said, "She talks about you. Not constantly, but she has since before any of this. I don't think she'd want me to tell you that, so I'm going to act like I didn't." I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said, "I have a girlfriend." Rin said, "I know. She sounds like she matters." I said, "She does." Rin nodded once and stood up. She said, "Room 14. Take your coffee." The coffee was terrible. I was grateful for it in a way that went well beyond the coffee. What comes after? I don't know what comes after. I mean that genuinely, not as a deflection. I know that Maya is going to need to heal in ways that are visible and ways that aren't, and that the second category is the longer project and the harder one. I know there will be legal things that I am a part of, and I will show up for all of them without complaint. I know Dominic is somewhere I'm actively choosing not to think about right now, because the thoughts that live in that direction are not the kind I want to be inside of. I know I need to talk to Priya. A real conversation, not the abbreviated parking lot version. She deserves the full picture and she's going to get it, and I don't know exactly how it lands, but I know she's someone who can hold complicated things without dropping them, and that's exactly what I need right now. I know that the version of my life that existed yesterday morning, relatively uncomplicated, moving forward at a reasonable pace, a girlfriend, a job, a manageable amount of unresolved feeling filed in the appropriate drawer, is not quite the same version I'm living in now. Something shifted tonight. I'm not going to pretend to know its full shape yet. What I know, most simply, is that she's down the hall. That run just told me to bring my coffee. that the nurse is going to let me in a few minutes, and I'm going to walk into that room and I'm going to see her, and I don't have a speech and I don't need one. I'm just going to be there. That's it. That's the whole plan. Sometimes that's the only plan available, and it turns out to be exactly enough. Update. Posted 4 days later. A lot of people asked me to come back and say something. So here I am, briefly. Maya is at her parents' house. She will not be going back to that apartment. That is already decided, completely without discussion. Her ribs are going to take weeks. Her face is healing faster in some ways and slower in others, which is apparently how it goes. She is, exactly as Rin predicted, furious. Not at me, not at anyone specifically, just at the whole situation and what it cost her and the indignity of having to recover from something she didn't cause. The fury is, I think, healthy. I think the fury is Maya being Maya, and Maya being Maya is a good sign. I've been over twice. Short visits. I bring food she didn't ask for, specifically the 2 or 3 things I learned to cook in the last 8 months. The ones I told myself were about self-improvement and were probably also a little bit about her. I sit with her for an hour and I leave before she has to tell me to. The second visit, she said, out of nowhere, in the voice she uses when she's been building to something. I should have seen it earlier. I said, maybe, but you didn't. And not seeing something isn't the same as deserving what came from it. She looked at the wall for a while. Then she said, you still have blood on that jacket. I said, I haven't washed it yet. She said, Daniel. I said, I know. I went home and I put the jacket in the wash. I watched the cycle run from the kitchen, drinking tea. It felt like closing something, in the small way that small things sometimes close larger ones. I talked to Priya. The full conversation, everything. She was quiet through most of it, which is one of the things about her I have come to trust completely. She listens before she responds, really listens in the way that some people are incapable of. When I finished, she said she needed a day to sit with it. I said of course. She called the next evening and she said she wasn't going anywhere, and she said she needed me to be honest with her going forward the way I'd been honest that night, and I said I would be, and I meant it. We haven't talked yet, Maya and I, about the 8 months, about Dominic, about what any of this means for whatever we are to each other now. I don't think this is the time. She's healing. There's a lot of ground to cover before we get to that ground, if we ever get there at all. For now, she's home. She's safe. She's furious in the productive direction. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything for right now. The jacket came out clean. TLDR. Ex left me 8 months ago saying her new boyfriend made her happy. Last week she called me at midnight from what I can only describe as the worst situation I've ever driven toward. I got there. She's okay. I've been in a waiting room for 6 hours. I have a girlfriend who is being extraordinary about this, and I don't fully know what comes next. She's alive. That's where we start.